Chapter 29. Before Luke had a chance to move, Jen's dad had picked him up and thrust him into the closet. "There's a secret door at the back," he hissed. "Use it." Luke groped blindly, fighting through what felt like piles of hair. Behind him, he could hear Jen's dad yelling, "I'm coming! I'm coming! That's a $12,000 door. If you break it down, you're going to pay." Then Luke heard the computer making its beep, beep, and Jen's dad muttering, "Fine time for them to discover efficiency. Come on, connect." The pounding at the door grew louder, and a gruff voice yelled out, "You have 3 seconds, George." Luke dug deeper into the closet. He couldn't even find the back wall, let alone any secret door. And then he heard a splintering sound from the front of the house. Seconds later, there were stomping footsteps in the computer room. "What is the meaning of this?" It was Jen's dad's voice coming from the hall, full of outrage. If he hadn't witnessed it himself, Luke never would have guessed that Jen's dad had been crying only moments before. He sounded too forceful, too assured, too confident that he was right and anyone who opposed him was wrong. The stomping stopped. From deep inside the closet, Luke heard someone snicker. "Caught you with your pants down, eh, George?" Yes, very funny," Jen's father replied, not sounding the least bit amused. There was a sound that could have been a zipper being zipped. "Has it come to this? A man can't even go to the bathroom without his door being broken down by a bunch of morons with power complex? And you will pay for that door, I assure you." If Luke had been one of the population police, Jen's dad would have scared him to pieces. Luke would have backed out, muttering, I'm sorry." He never would have believed that Jen's dad was hiding a 3rd child. Hopefully, Luke paused in his burrowing into the Talbots' closet. But the voice that answered Jen's father carried only the slightest edge of doubt. "Come off it, George. You know we're entitled to search and seize. We have reports of that computer being used for illegal purposes just a half an hour ago." "You're even bigger fools than I thought," Jen's dad answered. "Don't any of you read your memos? I reported to Central Command this morning that I was going to continue my sting operation in the illegal chat rooms. See? I wrote, 'Where's Jen?' and 'Hello? Is anybody there?' which is what some lost, confused 3rd child who missed the rally might write. Are you so low-ranking that you don't know I was pretending to be the guerrilla leader, Jen, all along? Did you miss the commendation ceremony where I was awarded for the disposal of 40 illegals?" Luke wondered that Jen's dad could say her name without his voice giving him away. If Luke didn't know Jen, hadn't known her, he corrected himself with a wince. And he didn't know how much she trusted her father. He would have been certain that Jen's father had double-crossed her. As it was, his head swam with the fear that Jen's father still might betray him. How could he trust anyone who spoke so coldly of the disposal of 3rd children? Luke struggled on through the closet, reaching a stack of blankets at the back. Finally, he touched the wall, but everything he felt was smooth. Jen's father said there was a door. There had to be a door. The voices from outside the closet were muffled now. "See the memo? I'm sure it's on your desk back at the office with all the paperwork you never read." Jen's dad raised his voice so Luke could hear him clearly. "Or can you even read?" The population police officer ignored the insult. "Show us on the computer." "Very well." Luke prayed that Jen's dad had something to show them. He could not find the door, though he ran his fingers along the wall again and again. His heart was beating so loudly he was sure the population police could hear him. All he could hear the population police and Jen's father were mutterings. Then the one officer's voice rang out, "You're lying, George. We're going to search." "Just because of a computer malfunction? Fine. It's not my problem." Luke was stunned by the indifference in Jen's father's voice. "But when you don't find anything, and you won't, you know that I'm entitled to the illegal search and seizure benefits granted to barons, and I will press charges. Should I use the extra money on caviar or champagne?" George, you wouldn't really sue." "You don't think so? Then go ahead. Start here." Suddenly, the closet was flooded with light. Luke stifled a gasp. How could Jen's father have flung open the door of the very place Luke was hiding? Desperately, Luke yanked a blanket over his head. None of the population police answered. Jen's father, but the pattern of shadows that fell on Luke's blanket made him think the population police were standing right in the door of the closet. He heard hangers scraping against a metal bar, and then the population police walked away. Confused and terrified, Luke remained huddled under the blanket. He could hear muffled footfalls elsewhere in the house, and was certain they'd be returning to the computer room any minute. Before they killed him, he hoped they let him go back to his parents to tell them how much he loved them. He could apologize to Matthew and Mark, too, for not appreciating the checkers and card games they played with him when he knew they'd rather be outside. And probably he should apologize to his parents for disobeying and coming to Jen's house in the first place. Except even scared to death of being found, he couldn't scrape up full regret for that. Anyhow, it wasn't likely that they'd let him see his parents before they killed him. He'd have to protect his parents and refuse to even reveal who they were. Luke's mind was still racing with frantic plans when he heard someone coming back to the computer room. There was only one set of footsteps, so he dared to hope. "You could have swept up the glass on your way out." It was Jen's dad. Luke strained to hear an answer, but none came. Were the population police gone? Luke kept his head down. He heard Jen's dad wading into the closet. Then he pulled the blanket off Luke and clamped his hand over Luke's mouth. Luke started to struggle until he read the words on the paper that Jen's dad held in front of his face. It said, "They're gone. You're safe, but don't talk." Luke relaxed and nodded to show he would obey. Jen's dad released him, flipped the paper over, and began writing furiously. "House bugged now." Luke gave Jen's dad a puzzled look. "B," he started to say, then remembered and stopped. He took the pen from Jen's dad and wrote, "Bugged? Ants? Roaches?" Jen's dad shook his head frantically. "Bugs equals little listening devices. Population police hear everything. That's why I can't talk. They do that when a bust's unsuccessful. Even left one bug on me." Jen's dad turned around and pointed, and Luke saw a small disc sticking to the back of his collar. Luke frowned and wrote on the paper, "Why not take off?" Jen's dad shook his head. "Safer this way. Long as they think that they can hear everything, they won't come back." Jen's dad pointed to the hairy lumps on the hangers behind him. "Bribe them with fur coats. Very rare and very valuable." Luke looked at the coats. There did seem to be a lot fewer of them now. Were they animal skins? Why would anyone want such a thing? He couldn't ask, though, because Jen's dad was already scribbling more. Jen bought time. "My goose probably is cooked now. I didn't follow that memo. They'll find out." Luke reached for the pen. "What will they do to you?" Jen's dad shook his head. "Don't know," he wrote. "I've survived this kind of thing before, but everything's chancy now. The fact that they got here so fast, they have it in for me." Weakly, Luke leaned his head back against the closet wall. That reminded him of his frantic search along its surface. He reached for the paper and wrote, "Where's the door?" Jen's dad pulled out a new sheet of paper. Shaking his head, he wrote, "There isn't one. Just wanted to get you to the back of the closet." Luke buried his face in his hands. Jen's dad was a good liar. There was no doubt about that. How could Luke trust him? Luke raised his head and watched as Jen's dad scribbled something else on the paper. His expression was full of concern, and Luke knew, somehow, that he was trustworthy. He easily could have turned Luke in and gotten praise in another commendation ceremony. But how confusing to never know when someone is lying. Jen's dad turned the paper to face Luke. It said, "So? Want fake ID or not?" Luke gulped. After a minute, he wrote back, "Am I safe if I don't?" Jen's dad seemed to be weighing the question. He narrowed his eyes and wrote, "Probably. They're after me now, not you. If they really thought there was an illegal here, they wouldn't take my bribe, or would take it and you, too. But I'd advise you to get an ID." Luke wrote back, "Can't I wait? Think about it for a while?" That was what Luke wanted, or not even to think, but to hide from thinking for a while. He wanted to remember Jen and grieve for her by himself. He didn't want to have to think about what parts of the population law were good and what parts were bad, or why his family didn't have more money. He didn't want to have to figure out Jen's dad and other people like him who could pretend to be so many different things. He didn't want to have to decide something now that could change the rest of his life. But Jen's dad had written back, "Don't know. Maybe case of now or never."